School is brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Real Agriculture is back at Ridgetown College today. We're going to talk to Dr. Dave Hooker about corn. Sir, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Hey, one of the things, some of the work you've been doing, an interesting concept of looking at different factors that impact yield in a field, even specifically with specific hybrids. You call it multi-factor impact. Tell us a little bit about that research and what you're learning.
Yeah, so multi-factor, we're looking at multiple factors at once and how they impact each other. So crops don't respond to one factor at a time. They respond to a whole system of factors. And so why should we manage just based on one factor at a time? We should be managing one factor and acknowledge the impact that that one factor could have on these other factors as well. So there's a potential to increase crop yields. There's a potential to increase crop efficiency if we can gain some efficiencies by thinking of more than one factor at a time.
Now you've seen that in wheat, right? That's where the idea comes from.
Exactly. So this is some of the data that we had from our Smart Wheat project way back in 2008, like eons ago. So this is some of the data that myself and Jonathan Brinkman have worked on, and also Peter Johnson. And so this is an example of a multi-factor trial where we looked at nitrogen response and also with and without fungicide application across a number of varieties, number of environments. And so at 90 pounds of the acre of nitrogen without fungicide, our standard yield in this case across multiple varieties, multiple environments, 90 bushel to the acre. When we increase the nitrogen rate from 90 to 150, our yield increases 8 bushel to the acre. And also if we use 90 pounds of the acre of nitrogen and added a fungicide, applied a fungicide at heading, we also saw an average of 8 bushel to the acre. But when we combine the two, high nitrogen and fungicide, that's where we got this synergistic response. So synergistic means that it's an additive effect. Two additive effects are more than what those two effects would be added together. So in this case, 8 bushels for both nitrogen and fungicide should equal 16 would be a true additive effect. In this case, it was 19 bushel to the acre increase. So that's an example of a synergistic effect. And so that's why our nitrogen rates have changed. Our recommendations have changed based on the decision whether we applied a fungicide or not.
Now let's talk about corn. You've got
Yes.
You're looking at population, nitrogen, and fungicide. Take us through what you've done there and then how it all adds up.
Yeah, so this is a tremendous response. This is was a great news story starting back in 2008. So we wondered, what other management factors should we consider or should we be looking at in terms of corn response? And so we decided to look at some very important input factors for corn, and one of them is a foliar fungicide application. So we looked at the VT application, and of course the fungicide application has numerous effects other than, in addition to controlling disease at grain fill. So you can see a fungicide applied corn looks like it's quite a bit greener than at the end of the grain fill than it is with a no fungicide applied. So some disease was controlled there, but also there's a physiological change there as well. So what impact does that have on the yield? And this is some of the data that was retrieved from that fungicide only study. So this is a hybrid by fungicide response, and as you can see, some hybrids responded up to 30 bushel to the acre, and some hybrids did not respond at all. So does the response to a fungicide depend on the hybrid? Absolutely it does. Look at this interaction between hybrid and fungicide application. And so another input here is nitrogen as well. So here's a field that we just have had side dress with nitrogen, and so nitrogen rates are important as well. If we under apply nitrogen, we lose yield potential. If we over apply nitrogen, we lose economics, and we also have a much bigger environmental impact, and we don't want that for sure. And also the third biggest input here is population. That's right. And so a 34,000 standard population, how does that population compare to something like in the high 30s? And we went to the extreme, and so we went to 44,000 plants per acre, which would represent the extreme end of a population response. So we looked at all of those factors together in combination. So fungicide, population, and high nitrogen rates, and looked at all combinations of those factors to see if there's any of those synergistic inputs like we saw for the wheat.
What we find?
Well, we found some very interesting results. So we looked at all these factors across six different hybrids. That's right. And so if we kept our standard normal management practice, so in this case 120 pounds to the acre of nitrogen, 32,000 plants per acre with no fungicide, if all we did was increase the population to 44,000 plants per acre, this was our yield response depending on the hybrid. So look at this. Some hybrids responded 5 bushel, other hybrids responded up to 26 bushel just with a change in population by itself. Okay? So if we look at nitrogen, where we just look at the standard practice, but all we did was increase the nitrogen rate, our yield response, depending on the hybrid, varied between 4 and 21 bushel to the acre. And if we looked at the same thing with the fungicide, so normal practice, all we did was apply a fungicide, our hybrid response varied from 0 to 13 bushel to the acre. So tremendous differences here. And then when we look at all 3 factors at once, so high population, high nitrogen, high fungicide, we're looking at a yield response that varies between 19 bushel to the acre and 40 bushel to the acre, depending on the hybrid. So this is kind of a trend that we're noticing, that the responsive hybrids to these inputs tend to be the most responsive to, let's say, population by itself, or high nitrogen rates, to fungicide. They seem to have a top-end yield potential where they could use a few more inputs to give us a more economic yield. And so we need to consider that, especially when we look at or select corn hybrids. And also maybe hybrid number 1 was a very high yielding hybrid, but you probably, in this case, it probably would not respond to a fungicide application as well as hybrid number 5 would, for instance. Okay? So then we can maybe drop fungicide out in this case and just go with high population and nitrogen. And so these are our yield responses from 13 to 34 bushel. And in this case, we're dropping the nitrogen out, so just looking at high population and fungicide. Our yield responses vary from 2 to 27, depending on the hybrid. And if we look at the final category here, where we just keep the normal plant population, look at high nitrogen and a fungicide application, our yield responses vary from 0 to 36 bushel to the acre.
Dave, do you have a sense where the economic thresholds are here? I mean, like, obviously we've got 40 bushels in some of these scenarios.
That's right. So really this project, we need to look at the economics, but in order to figure out the economics, we really need to know the good hard numbers in terms of the yield responses to these inputs. So the economics are just favorable for 40 bushel to the acre, and of course that would depend a lot on whether the corn price was $4 a bushel or $6.50 a bushel,
Sure.
Obviously as well. So the economic analysis absolutely needs to be considered when looking in or choosing inputs or hybrids as well.
Now, you're taking this research to another step now, because it's getting rolled into the trials, right?
Yeah, that's right. So
Or the approach.
yeah, the approach for sure. So we can look at other data as well. So this is some data that from my program from a few years back. So these are the nitrogen responses by grain yield, by a hybrid. And you can see some hybrids here, they crisscross each other, and so they really do quite poorly with very little nitrogen application, but they tend to top out the chart with higher amounts of nitrogen versus other hybrids itself. So we have a tremendous data set that shows that there are tremendous hybrid responses with these inputs, and this is an example with nitrogen as well. And so this is another response where we have nitrogen, high nitrogen, and population. In 2012 and 2013, we saw up to 105 bushel to the acre response with high nitrogen and high population versus no nitrogen. So 105 bushel to the acre. But that same hybrid, this is the funny thing, the same hybrid last year, so in kind of a backwards year, that hybrid fell apart completely, and it was one of the lowest responding. So not only do we have interactions with inputs, we also have an environmental condition as well that we need to consider. And so this really bodes well for the spatial variability characteristic precision ag farming. This provides much data that we need to work harder in looking at also the environmental response in addition to nitrogen, fungicide, and population responses as well. So we're taking this data that's kind of fueled the approach where we're taking this to the next level and looking at hybrid responses in our Ontario Corn Committee trials, in our OCC trials, and Greg Stewart talked about this in a previous episode as well. So we're looking at incorporating these responses into what we call a managed trial. Okay, so we look at a high-intensive managed trial comparing those hybrids where they're intensively managed versus those hybrids that are managed according to a more normal practice. So this could go a long ways in terms of fine-tuning the requirements for each hybrid in terms of what we should apply, how much we should apply, and just to characterize the hybrids. Like, we don't know why one hybrid would respond more to the other. And so we're getting more research and trying to figure out genetically why some hybrids would respond more than others. And so we're doing that in our OCC trials.
Yeah, and that's going to give farmers some information to make decisions on, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Dave, fascinating work. We look forward to hearing more about it in the future. Another year of data always makes things progress, and right. We'll talk a little bit more about it probably this time next year.
That's right. Hopefully the weather in 2015 will be better than 2014.
We hope.